All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your bloody goat flaming brain. What are we talking about today, Sam?
Well, by your shirt, your coat, I should say, we are
Yes.
doing Wheel of Time, and we actually filmed this back to back with our last episode that you'll see a few days before. But we did say we weren't going to change, but we decided to because you got your coat in, and I needed happier thoughts, so I wanted to tell the world how it really is. Uh,
Yeah, and I'm heading to a wedding next week, which is why we're filming early. And it instead of your normal wedding attire, the bride to be wanted like a Ren Fair setting, and so that's the decoration. But also, so like her mother and father-in-law are going to be dressed up as the king and queen, presiding over the ceremonies and all that. And
and we've already done a superhero wedding. What were you? I was Hulk.
uh, I was not there. I just hung
Oh,
out for the pre-festivities, but then I had to leave, so I wasn't able to actually
okay.
attend the wedding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that was a friend of ours, and everyone wore like a superhero
Yeah,
t-shirt
everybody in the
under
wedding
instead of
party
the
was a
normal.
superhero.
And so
And
there's a picture of y'all pulling your dress shirts and your coats open to reveal your,
except everybody had
Hulk
a
after
shirt on
working on
for the
those suits.
reveal, except I was body paint.
Yep, yeah, Hulk smash.
Hulk
All right.
smash. Yeah.
So we wanted to do a bit of a Wheel of Time quickie here, not just in honor of my awesome coat that I love, and I'm gonna have to find more reasons to wear, but um this was news to me too last night. I'm just
Yeah,
scrolling
sorry,
through X.
Lance.
Yeah, scrolling
Yeah.
through X, looking at stuff, and Gary from Neurotic posted this Deadline article that was published yesterday. Wheel of Time canceled by Prime Video after 3 seasons. So exclusive, they say, and the reason this is kind of a big deal is because as
But because the
people
last article I saw was why you shouldn't be worried about it being canceled. And
Oh, well, I hadn't seen that, but I meant the reason it's a big deal that it's Deadline is Deadline is basically it's like what Pravda is to Russian media. It is essentially the propaganda arm of Hollywood.
hmm,
That it when a studio has a story or a narrative they want out, Deadline is one of the places they go. There's a handful, a few of these um media that reports on media, and Deadline is probably the top of that list. So this is a, essentially, you can take this as um uh, a PR release from Amazon MGM itself. Okay. Prime Video will not be renewing The Wheel of Time for a fourth season. The decision, which comes more than a month after the season 3 finale was released April 17th, followed lengthy deliberations. As often is the case in the current economic environment, the reasons were financial, as the series is liked creatively by the streamer's executives.
you
The
mean the
TV,
executives that were just fired?
that's why I find this article interesting.
Yeah.
The TV adaptation of the book series by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, co-produced by Sony Pictures TV and Amazon MGM Studios, is a high-end, pricey fantasy drama, which ushered in the genre on Prime Video, later joined by The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. Starring Rosamund Pike, The Wheel of Time got off to a strong start in 2021 as Prime Video's most watched series premiere of the year and one of the platform's top 5 series launches of all time. That is some serious spin, because I don't know what the numbers are for Wheel of Time, but from Nerdrotic's very in-depth reviews of Rings of Power, they go into, now, as I've said before, all of these streamers lie or spin or just flat out won't tell you, but we don't know what the numbers are, the real numbers. And so you have to go off of third party things to kind of verify and collate with whatever the streamer itself is saying. And one of the biggies for Rings of Power was Prime Video touting how many people watched the premiere, the first episode of the first season of Rings of Power. But if you look at the third party people like Nielsen and some of these other people, viewership from the first episode to the last episode dropped by about 2/3. Only about 1 out of 3 people who watched the first episode watched the last episode of Rings of
Yeah,
Power.
and that's where the spin comes in a little bit because, or a lot of it, everything, because when you take a, this is why the movie model works better for this, because you take something that's already popular and you make a product, but nobody knows what the product's going to be, so they're going by what's popular first. And Wheel of Time had so many fans that tuned in for that initial episode, maybe gave it a few at a time, but then it just dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped. Uh, so the opening was all of us nerds that have been waiting for this for forever.
Mm-hmm.
And then the end result, which is season 3, season 2, season 3, is the people who stuck around, which is some of us that comment on it online, and the people who weren't real fans to begin with, and the occasional Lance who was a fan of the books and a fan of the show.
Mm-hmm.
So there is the occasion. I mean, they exist, but apparently they were the minority because the show got canceled.
Yeah. To that point, now I don't remember. All right, so for anyone who doesn't know, the Nielsen rankings were the rankings back in the day of network television. And the way that worked is that the Nielsen company would use solid statistics, the kind of crud that you have to take in your
Hey,
classes
I got
to
an
do
A.
stuff. But there is a, for anyone who's never done it, there is a science of statistics. It is based in math.
Hey, credit to my teacher because college is so easy these days. That was one of the hardest tests I've ever taken.
Yeah.
That yeah.
Cute. Well, awesome then.
Yeah.
Double awesome for getting, kudos to the teacher, kudos to you for getting an A.
Mm.
But the point is there are ways to construct a representative sample so that you can reliably say that, yeah, this is, people who don't understand will look and say, well, you only surveyed 1,200 people and this is a nation of 300 million. Okay, well, it's a representative sample because we
Mhm.
know how to do that if you do it right, if you're honest about it, and if you're
And it's
intellectually
truly random,
integral.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
all of those
So
things that go into it, and assuming the bell curve, and yeah.
so I'm not sure how Nielsen does it with streaming. That's what makes me go, hmm. So, but the way they used to do it is they would take a representative sample and they would contact people and say, you have been chosen to be a Nielsen family. Would you like to participate? And
Mhm.
what they would do is they would give you this, essentially like this mini cable box that you would attach to your TV and it would collect data. And so then Nielsen would know what you were watching and when and how much. And so
Mhm.
they would also know if you turned it off. If you started watching Cheers and then said meh and didn't finish, they would be able to tell that. Which was super important to the studios and to the advertisers paying the studios.
Mhm.
So they were, for the longest time, the benchmark when it came to ratings. I don't know if that is true for streamers because I don't know how they collect
I
their
would
data.
have to see what the legal ramifications are for this, and this might be something we research it in more depth. Now that I'm thinking it out loud, it's making more sense because there's so much data collected from your apps that they know who you are and what you're watching. That's how the algorithm works because it knows all that information and it feeds you what it thinks you want to see.
Mhm.
And so you use that same data collection to create you don't even need a sample at that point because you have everybody's data that is watching it.
Mhm. All right. So the reason I bring that up is because the next couple of paragraphs in this deadline article are about the Nielsen rankings. Um, there are other data collectors out there that do do their own thing. And so that's, if you really want to deep dive into the nerdiness of this, go check out some of the channels that do deep dives on that stuff. But I just want to get through this and then we'll offer our thoughts. 3 seasons in, the series has remained a solid performer, but its viewership has slipped, with the fantasy drama dropping out of Nielsen's top 10 originals chart after the first 3 weeks of season 3, while staying on the list for the entire runs of the previous 2 seasons. The Wheel of Time was back on the originals ranker for the week after the season 3 finale at number 10. The Nielsen rankings reflect US viewership. Streaming renewal decisions are made based on how a show does around the world, and The Wheel of Time is a global title. It did rank as number 1 on Prime Video in multiple countries with the most recent season. Still, the season 3 overall performance was not strong enough compared to the show's cost for Prime Video to commit to another season, and the streamer could not make it work after examining different scenarios and following discussions with lead studio Sony TV, sources said. With the cancellation possibility and the show's passionate fan base in mind, the season 3 finale was designed to offer some closure. Did you
Oh yeah,
watch the same finale that we
yeah.
did?
Oh yeah. I'm like, you've declared yourself the person who's going to save the world, but we haven't gotten to saving the world yet. That's like the opposite of closure. That's actually kind of an opener, realistically.
Yeah, that again, Deadline is a PR arm
You
of
got
Hollywood.
Perrin
So,
going off into captivity as his last moment. That's not closure. I mean, unless you're going to just assume they're going to kill him and it's over. And
well, the last we saw of Perrin's storyline, remember in that kind of epilogue, while I don't remember who was doing the narration, that was I think it may have been the guy who played Loyal. I think it may have been
it
him.
was, yeah.
Yeah, and he was reciting a number of lines of the prophecy of the dragon, and you see several different short little clips. And for Perrin's storyline, it was Fail and Bane and Chiad standing on some cliff overlooking a white cloak encampment. So the implication was they're going to get him out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you've got that. You've got Matt and the girls and Tom on a boat going somewhere for some reason. We have no idea why, because there was no setup to that. So we kind of ranted about that. I don't remember what the clip was with Rand and the Aiel. I think there was something there. Um, did they even make it clear if Moiraine died? I I feel like that
No, they
wasn't
didn't
even
make it clear.
clear.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, it sure looked like she was on death's door while Lan was holding her, but I don't even know if they made it clear that she died. I haven't rewatched it, because I don't want to. So if you remember more distinctly than I do, go ahead and let me know. But the point being, boy, that's some spin. Um, the main spin here is, or
Well,
the
I mean,
main.
I guess if they did make it clear she died and they made her the main character, it is over.
Oh, that's true. That was one of our frequent complaints about the show, is that Moraine is the main character of the show.
Well, we know Swan died because her head was cut off by the power, by someone who shouldn't be able to cut somebody's head off with the power without being named a dark friend.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Lance, I'm
The
sorry, your argument is
Yeah,
invalid. I'm sorry. There's so many bad wrongs that it's just,
killing is badong.
yeah.
Exactly. To quote one of the all-time greats of cinema. Anyway, but the kernel of truth here, because they keep pointing it out, is the cost.
Hmm.
That and this is true across streaming, is that
Which
when
you
all
actually saw it in that third season because everything was enhanced when it comes to cinematography and everything. Tanchico was a little like you could tell it was in a warehouse,
Mhm.
but everything else, the ride-in scene with the fog cloud and everything, that was high level CG.
One
That
of our
looked
complaints
real.
about the first season is every time we saw someone channeling, it looked the same, and you actually started to see different colors and different
Mhm.
threads and different effects. in the late in season two and in season three. So the channeling effects were better later, which again that is going to add to the cost. Um, but this is a problem across all streamers, is all of these studios saw what Netflix was doing and they saw dollar signs and they were all penny wise and pound foolish. You take Disney, Marvel, and they were getting reportedly hundreds of millions of dollars in licensing money from Netflix. And then they decided we're going to do our own thing. And instead, they are losing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on Disney Plus. So
Mhm.
here's a good example that I saw someone point out on X yesterday or the day before, is that I hate this because it's one of my favorite animated Disney movies, Lilo and Stitch. And I don't understand why they're doing a live action because the movie itself is already phenomenal. And from every preview and clip I've seen, you're just taking the movie scene by scene, but doing it live action with a CG Stitch, right? So why? Just re-release the original and make money like you did with that was one of the embarrassments recently, is that Clone Wars, no, not Clone Wars, Revenge of the Sith, yeah, the third one, Star Wars Episode 3 was
Mhm.
re-released for its anniversary and it made more money than Snow White. But the point this person was making was, keep in mind, the live action Lilo and Stitch was originally made and intended as a Disney Plus exclusive. They did the same thing with Moana 2, which I never watched the first one. I didn't watch the second one. I don't care. But the guy's point was, you were originally going to release this as a Disney Plus exclusive. You ended up releasing it in theaters simply because you didn't have anything else to release. And it made almost $1 billion worldwide gross. So that's not the studio's cut, but still, the point being, we'll see how it plays out. But right now, the tracking numbers, the estimates for what Lilo and Stitch's opening weekend is going to be, keep going up and have been going up for like 3 or 4 straight weeks. And that's partly guesstimation, but that's also partly pre-sales of tickets. So there is some hard number there, and it keeps going up and up. So it might hit that $1 billion mark worldwide too. And you weren't going to do this so that you could push your streaming service? Are you people retarded? Same thing here is, and the reason I'm bringing this up is, you don't have a good revenue model and you are spending a ton of money to make these shows.
Mhm.
You have to figure this, and this is where, for people like Lance, this is where this isn't all necessarily doom and gloom, because the way these rights deals work, I don't know the specifics of this one, but whenever you get the rights for an existing property,
Mhm.
it is for a set number of years. So you have the exclusive rights to make a TV show or make a movie or make a video game, but you have to do it within a set amount of time or you lose those rights. The rights revert to the IP owner, and then they can sell those rights to someone else if they want. So presumably Amazon, Sony TV, whoever, since they're working together, they still have a number of years on their license, which means if you wanted to see this keep going, if you didn't hate it the way I did, if you saw some glimmer of hope in it, down the road, they are almost certainly going to try again because
Yeah.
it's too lucrative not to.
Well, and you were talking about you wanted this episode to go into what we think they could do to make it better and come back and recover from this. And I think that's where the scramble is now. And let's talk a
Mhm.
numbers game. People are having less kids, and they have been having less kids for a while now. This book, or the series of books, is a Gen X and early millennial phenomenon.
Mm.
So the kind of that the older the younger Gen X's and the older millennials are kind of the base audience for the book series. And obviously we weren't impressed because we had a huge opening and then a tapering off because people were falling out. And so again, Lance, you're probably not watching, but you're the rare I liked the books and I liked the show. We obviously loved the books, and we've voiced many a complaint about the show. We have one for every episode. And the producers of the producers of the show, I would say, the executives that they said love the show aren't even there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And Amazon Prime is probably saying, how do we get that giant audience that has more people because less kids have been made over time for a long time, and there's less of an audience? That's why there's so many musical artists that are coming out or that have been around for a long time that are selling out stadiums, and the Gen Z music artists are just barely making it because the audience is bigger with our demographic, because there's just more people. It's math. There are just more people. America is getting older percentage wise because we're having less kids and we're living longer. And so Amazon has to say, okay, so how do I get back this late Gen X, early millennial crowd with what we already have? Because if Amazon is going to do it, they have to piggyback on what they've already done. And now we have to have a marketing campaign that says, okay, we axed this. And they have to be honest and say, we axed this because we know we alienated a certain crowd. But please come back because we fixed it. It took us an extra 2 years to do it. We had some footage and we used some of that footage, but we came back and we said, we're gonna get back to the books. We're gonna take some of this stupid stuff out that y'all hate, and we're gonna do it. Some of it's gonna be some growing pains. There's some things we can't just like undo, but we're gonna get back on track. And they have to have a marketing campaign that does that to do what you said to bring it back.
Mm-hmm.
That actually is believable to people our age. And that's going to take some doing because it's going to take a lot to convince me.
Well, see, that's why I don't think you can just let it sit for a while, uh,
No, they
reevaluate
have to
things on a
actively
creative
market
ways.
this. Yeah.
No, no, no. But what I mean is, I don't think it's enough to just what
Okay,
is
so
this?
this is part of it.
Okay.
Look at the episodes that Sierra and Donnelly did.
Sarah and Donnelly directives is 1, 2, 7, and 8.
So this is part of the marketing process. We axed that director because if you look at season 3, what were the best episodes?
I'm
Three
trying to
through
remember
3 through 7,
the
3 through 6.
the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 through 6. Remember, 3 was the one we were like, that's the best episode they've done this entire time.
Yeah, yeah. I was trying to remember what happened in which episode because
Yeah.
I can remember the
We
events, but I was trying to remember what happened in which
we never
episode.
got our ratings from you guys
Hmm.
on the directors because I was watching that, and Sierran, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name. If I mispronounce your name, it's not racist. Donnelly, you are the problem because every episode you did is the ones we hated the most. And that's got to be part of it. You got to say, oh, look, we took the data from these things and we said, oh, the original fans didn't like these. And this was the person in charge at that time. Now, Rafe's got to go too. But he definitely
That's the biggie.
that's the thing. That's the part of the marketing campaign is you have to have heads fall. I mean, it's got to be French Revolution type stuff before the next go round, or else we won't believe it.
Hmm. Well, the point I was getting at though is that I don't think that's doable. I think you have to start over. I don't think you can wait a few years and say we've cleaned house, we have a new production crew, we have new writers, new director, new showrunner, and we're gonna pick back up. I don't think that's possible. I think the series is too much to damaged goods
There's a
to
little
regain that goodwill.
there's a little sunken cost for me personally. So this is my personal thoughts on it, which I actually think you're right. But if I was to say personally, the bright spots would also go away too. You
Well,
know,
but see, that's what I meant when I said I wanted to take, as a bit of a fig leaf and olive branch to those of you who liked the show. What good can we take from that? What I meant is to build on and remake something better. So
mhm,
for instance, as an analogy, um, one of the reasons Game of Thrones worked initially is because a lot of that production crew came from Rome.
mm,
And for anyone who watched Rome was 2 seasons on HBO, and they had more story to tell. They intended to keep going. I mean, more story to tell. It's history. It's the Roman Empire lasted, 1,500 years. But uh, if you count the East, which you should, but I digress. But it was too expensive. And so if you go back and you think about the big stuff in Game of Thrones, especially the last seasons that made us all go, ugh, you can see the cost there.
mhm.
Those are some big set pieces. Those are some big battles. So, but think about the first couple of seasons. It's all implied. It's not big. It's implied
Well,
that something
as
big
we
is
talked
happening.
about the two shows that parallel Vikings and Last Kingdom,
Mm,
their battles were to scale.
yeah,
They're talking about thousands of people of dying, but you only see like 50 or 100 people on set, right? And they did it right. Because they focus on the main characters and you just kind of see some things in the periphery. So it's like looking at something over here, but the focus of the camera is right here. And
yeah.
it kept the cost down and it kept everything. I mean, obviously they went for what, 7 seasons? Last Kingdom was five, I think, 5 seasons,
I think so. 5, yeah.
and they came to closure with a movie at the end. So it was very successful when we talk about streaming. Uh,
The point being, so rather than trying to make Rome season 3 because they weren't able to, what they did is say, okay, what did we learn from Rome? What did we learn from producing that series? And so Game of Thrones season 1 was essentially Rome season 3, but Game of Thrones. So they learned the practical technical lessons so that they were able to make a series that seemed way more expensive than it actually was.
mhm.
And that's what I mean about learning those lessons is what lessons can you learn from what worked versus what alienated the audience and caused to even again Deadline is basically a PR arm of Hollywood, and even they are admitting the viewership dropped off.
I think one mistake that a lot of productions make is based on a success in the past.
Mm,
The original Star Wars was basically an all amateur cast, except for Alec Guinness. It was
yeah.
basically an all amateur cast. And Star Wars was so successful with a person, Mark Hamill, who nobody knew. Uh, uh, Harrison
Harrison Ford had
Ford,
had a
who was a
bit part.
carpenter
Yeah.
on the set and just stood in for a reading because somebody didn't show up and ended up getting the part. Carrie Fisher, nobody knew. The only
She
established
was
person.
somebody's famous, yeah, somebody who was famous. She was her daughter, and that is how she
Hmm.
got in. But then she ultimately impressed Lucas enough to get the part. Yeah.
Mhm. And Alec Guinness was the only established person on the
Mhm.
set, and he came from traditional theater. He wasn't established in film, so
Peter
it's
Cushing too. He was
yeah.
he was primarily a stage actor. Royal Shakespeare Company, I
James
believe.
James Earl Jones. You
Hmm.
know, he was predominantly a stage actor before that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so they made a production that was the only word for the original Star Wars was epic, because we wouldn't even be hating on the new Star Wars now if the original one wasn't epic. If it
That's true.
sucked and they just kept going, we'd be like, oh, that's that cult classic that everybody just talks about, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
well, at least this one has better effects. Okay, whatever.
but a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
studios go, we're going to bring in this amateur cast basically and make this epic thing out of it. And that's one of the things they did with Wheel of Time here. Rosamund Pike was semi-established, but
Hmm.
realistically, look at her body of work. Did you know her before this? They're like, oh, she's been in all these things and got all these awards, but you didn't know who she was.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of stuff where I would when I looked her up, her IMDb, I was like, oh, I forgot she was in that. Oh, she was in that. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
probably
there was
the
a lot of
most
that.
well-known guy was the guy who played Tam. And I can't even give you his name off the top of my head.
I only know Elida because I liked The Expanse and I've watched it like 3 times.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Right,
yeah. Yeah, I knew her
and she
also
shows up
from
late.
the show, the Edgar Allan Poe show.
Fall of the House Usher.
Yes, yes. So
That's on
yeah,
my. I haven't watched that yet, but I've heard
that
it's good.
that's really good. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, but point aside, all these studios, especially with the Netflix stuff, they're like, we're going to take these people that nobody knows and then add the layer of, and we're going to make it an exclusively diverse cast.
You
And
know,
then,
that's an interesting point because one of there are generally two reasons that studios will give for that. Is that one? So like Lucas, when he was doing the prequels, he went out of his way to find an Anakin that no one would know because he didn't want you to associate this character with those other characters. So he went out.
kid
He did a
Anakin or adult
very
Anakin,
both. He
both.
he he did a very exhaustive search to now Hayden Christensen had done work before, but he was not a well-known person. You
Mm-mm,
know, it's not like Ewan McGregor. People knew Liam Neeson. Those were the two big names in
mm-hmm.
the opening, and it's like, oh, I know that guy, but they were lesser characters, especially
Well,
Liam Neeson's
even
character.
Samuel L. Jackson, they had him in there because of the draw.
Hmm.
And you have to learn from that because you need people in there that are a draw. I mean, one of our favorite characters from the Wheel of Times show was Natasha O'Keefe, who was Lanfear. And yes, she had previous work with Peaky Blinders, but she hadn't reached the point of draw yet.
And that's what I was getting at because number two is cost.
Hmm.
Is studios will often say, well, we want an unknown because we need to keep the costs down. Well, you can get someone in the middle there, someone who's not a complete unknown, but also isn't freaking Tom Cruise, right?
Hmm.
There's a lot of middle between those two heights. So you can get Samuel L. Jackson in the prequels because it's not going to cost you a lot because it's a small part.
Well, imagine something like this. Tom Holland is Matt.
Mm.
How many people would have watched the show just because Tom Holland was in it?
And then you find people who have experience but aren't known so that you can save some money there
Hmm.
and create an ensemble around, or I don't know who. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head that would work, but if anyone down there knows someone of a named actor who would fit for Rand, but as far
I
as
like Stradowski as Rand. That's the thing. You could have had a draw for one of the other characters
yeah,
and introduce this other guy who's pretty damn good.
but the point I was headed to is as far as learning lessons, I think the big negative lesson that I think should be learned is drop this mystery crap. Rand is the main
Oh yeah,
character.
yeah, yeah. That,
I,
that's
I
that's a
I
big
think
one.
that was one of the biggest failures of season one that
In
started them on a faulty foundation is no, Rand is the main character. Start with that, drop this mystery crap, and make Rand the main character. He has to be important. He has to connect with the audience. The audience has to be invested in his story. Now everybody else is important too. If you don't believe that, then go look at how many Wheel of Time episodes we have going through rereads and how many of those episodes aren't about Rand.
Yeah.
Okay. Those other characters are important too, but the story is Rand's story. It is the dragon's story.
I would even say have the first episode be from Rand's point of view and use what's called the continuous take,
Mm,
where there's no break
that would be
in
interesting.
and the whole episode is them getting the uh
Um,
to Edmonds
you know,
Field and him
yeah,
going through his interactions with Matt and Perrin and
I never
Tom
really thought about this
eventually.
before, but that's basically what the first 10-ish chapters are.
Hmm.
No, more like 12. Going from where you first see him on the road, it is one long, long, long day.
Hmm. Yeah,
As
because
they go to Emmons Field and then they go back home and he cuts the wood and then they get attacked and he has to drag Tam through the woods to get back. That's one day. So you
hmm
could do that as one take. That is
hmm
actually set up perfectly for one, and it wouldn't be a single take. It could be like 1917, which looks like one long take, but I don't think it actually is. Which I finally got around to seeing that movie and it was phenomenal. But so you could take an idea like that to, and the point of that isn't just to show off technically. It's because
well, you want to show off technically because I want to see as the fan that you are competent.
right, but for most people, I think it's back to the what the Red Letter Media guy said about the prequels is that most people aren't going to notice that consciously, but they will notice that subconsciously.
Hmm.
And the point being that this is going to get you immediately invested in Rand and his story. If you did one long take of him and his perspective, and now, oh, okay, who is this guy? What's going on here? Why is he so important? And then you pull in and you can spend some more time in the subsequent episodes as they're traveling to the Eye of the World and all that happens there, and you can start to pull in the other characters and let us get to know them more and show us why they're so important
Well,
to Rand's story.
and let's look at the principles of memory. Okay, so the acronym here is MEDIC. All right. Meaning, error correction, distinction, uh, importance, and oh shit, I'm forgetting the C, but meaning is what I'm going on here.
Mm.
So if I'm watching a show, what do you want me to be memorable? What do you want to be memorable to me? Because that's what you want to take from episode to episode, right? Is what's memorable about that first? Because I'm not going to remember every detail of the 60-minute thing I watched. So now you attach importance to things because his perspective determines who's important. So if he's interacting with Perrin and Matt and Egwene and Mr. Salvir and his father and all of these things, you attach meaning to all of those people because you know they're important to Rand. And that's going to make it more memorable as you go forward and you start laying out an epic story because this thing is so vast. You need meaning and importance to dominate every interaction early on.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise we're in season 3 and I'm go to season 3 and how many people forgot who Mr. Salvir was when Perrin went back?
Yeah.
We know how many because there's a totally different actress. Right? And nobody batted an eye. So that's the importance, right?
That is the other negative lesson that I'd take. I didn't want to harp on the negative
Context.
because I did
That was
that
the
so
C.
much. Yeah.
Context.
Um, is remember who the main characters are and make them the main characters. My big rant all through season 3 when we were talking about it was whose story is this? Because Perrin is playing second fiddle to Fail, to Loyal, to Bane and Chiad, to frickin' Mistress Alvear, who is a totally new actress, as you pointed out. He's playing second fiddle through his entire storyline. Don't You can't do that. The main characters have to be the main characters.
Well, in his storyline, they obviously made Alana the main character.
Yes. Yes. So that leads me to where I was going to try and be a little more positive is in evaluating uh what characters you cut, what characters you combined, and then same thing with storylines is, you can't do a beat by beat recreation of the book. That would be 17,000 hours long, and there's no way you could do that. It would be prohibitively expensive. And so you do have to cut. So, okay, when they tried this the first time, what did they cut? What worked? What didn't? What did they combine? What worked? What didn't? Making an Alana a bigger character could work. The problem is you made her too big.
Mm-hmm.
She overshadowed everybody else. Another example of that would be initially I didn't mind how they introduced Varen and that they combined
Her with
Vandy.
Adelaide, Vandy,
Yes,
Vandy and Adelaide. Well,
they
and also
right.
Alana was Myril as well. But at the same time, you look
Yeah,
at
yeah,
Alana. I'm going to stick with her because Varen is a separate thing. She should be super important.
yes,
But Alana and Myril, as characters in the book, were at a certain level that was equal. And so combining them keeps them at that level.
yeah,
There
yeah,
was no averaging out between the two. Adelise and Vandine and Varen, well, Varen was here
yes.
and Adelise and Vandine were there, so you can bring them here. And so that's fine.
The problem I would have, and then the lesson to learn though is initially I was like, you know what, this works. But then as I thought about it, I don't remember if I said this when we were reviewing it or not. I did have the thought of, but wait a minute. Knowing what we know about where Varen's story ends, can you still do that, or does it complicate things that she has a twin sister, or it has, I don't remember if they were twins. She has a sister, and so
Adelise
can
and Vandine
Varen.
were twins.
Okay,
Yeah.
so can Varen's story where it ends, does that still work, or do we have to do something to
If
work
her sister
around?
dies, because
So
remember her sister's like mentally incapacitated at the moment.
right, right.
Yeah.
So I would also make sure you have the big picture in mind, because that was a lot of our criticism early on is, well, wait a minute, you did this thing here, which is seemingly small now, but down the road, that's a big effing deal because
Mhm.
you've just changed something that has ramifications later. So keep the whole story in mind when you are making those cuts, making those combinations, making those changes. Is, does this affect something down the line? So do we have to, does this small change here make a big change there?
You know what it makes me feel like? I think part of it is the structure. Because remember, the old days, screenwriters were people that lived in their car to try to get a break. Uh, and they had these big picture ideas that they wanted to bring forward. They had a broad view of what needed to be done. And it wasn't perfect. There was errors in there, but there was still that big view. But all our screenwriters now come out of school. And I don't know if you know students recently, but they're thinking one paper to the next, to the next, to the next. They're thinking one test to the next, to the next. Oh, is the final going to be cumulative? Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So they're only focused on the next assignment. And that's what the feel I got from these 3 seasons was we're just trying to get to the next assignment and we'll deal with what happens later after that.
Yes. Yes. So that would be my next thought of, um, let me see here. There are people you can go get who would not be too expensive and would, let me see. No, go there. Writer. Okay. Jeff Loeb. You might not know the name off the top of your head. He is one of my
Is
favorite
he
comic
related to
book
One Hung
writers.
Lo?
No, Loeb.
Oh, Loeb.
Yeah. Um, he is a screenwriter and producer, but he's also a comic book writer. And he has written some of the best not just my favorite, but best as in highest sales and most accolades. He wrote The Long Halloween, which is one of the uh, highest touted. If you look at top 10 Batman stories, The Long Halloween will almost always show up. And it was the inspiration for The Batman, that movie. Uh, and he's wrote a number of other uh, comic books. Interestingly, he also wrote some big movies. For instance, for those, for you and me, I don't know how many of you youngsters out there will know, he wrote the screenplay for Teen Wolf. He wrote the screenplay for Commando.
Oh, Commando. Oh, God.
Yeah, talk about a goodie. And then later he wrote some episodes for Smallville, for Buffy, Heroes, the NBC show, the reboot of Teen Wolf. I'm looking at his IMDb right now. All right, but here's why I bring him up. Years ago, back before Kevin Smith lost his mind, I would sometimes listen to his podcast, and he interviewed Jeff Loeb about this. And Jeff Loeb had something interesting to say, is that because Kevin Smith was asking him, how did you get these gigs? Because that you usually don't see crossover like that. And he said, well, it's because the people who hired me to write screenplays didn't know I wrote comic books. What? Yeah. He said the reason I got Teen Wolf and Commando is because I had an agent that was able to get my screenplays, my script ideas and treatments in front of people, and they said, "Oh, hey, this is good. Write a full screenplay for this for us." And I did, and they liked it, and it got hired. And then one thing led to another, and I was able to write some more. These people didn't find out until later that I was also a comic book writer. They didn't hire me because I was an established writer. In fact, I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but in fact, had they known I was an established comic book writer, they never would have hired me. That is insane, but that is Hollywood, and that's 40 years ago, right? And that ideology still holds true. It doesn't make any sense, but that's the way they work. I would say going forward, if you decide, or when you decide, I don't say if, because I'm certain they're going to take another crack at this. When
Some
you
studio
decide,
somewhere when the rights are
yeah,
available will. Yeah.
no, I think Amazon's going to do it again before the rights expire. It's too lucrative not to, and you've
Hmm.
already paid for the rights. Go get the people who did the freaking graphic novels. Whether you have them write the actual screenplays or whether you just have them as story consultants and co-writers, they've already done it. A graphic novel is essentially storyboarding a show. You have people who have already done it. You've had people who have already adapted these ludicrously big novels into a smaller format. Start there and say, okay, what have you got? What are your ideas? Okay, well, our ideas are this. What do you think about that? Okay, now let's try and tweak things together. You already have people who have done this work. Use them, for crying out loud. And comic, these aren't like the big names in comics. These are lesser known people,
Hmm.
so they're not going to be that expensive.
Well, I'd say the second part of that is do like Jordan did and start with the ending.
Mm,
So
there's a good idea.
this is how we want it to end. And these are the people we want to be important in the ending. Let's just say, well, obviously Rand. Let's say the three girls, Matt and Perrin and Walrain. Okay, so these are the people we want important in there, and this is what part we want with them there, and this is our vision. And then make a story that ends with that, because even if it's different from the books, when you have a vision, it becomes obvious.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, okay, so I had to make this change from the books to get that to that ending. That's fine if I can see the vision. There was no vision in this show. It went from episode to episode to episode, just trying to fix the mistakes of the last episode.
Mhm. That is probably the best point and probably the place to end it is the one piece of advice going forward, the one thing to learn from this attempt at bringing the Wheel of Time to the screen, it is do it like Jordan did it because he's the freaking author, he's the creator. Start with the end
And work back,
and work backwards
because then
so
you
that you
can
have a coherent story.
it makes it obvious what you need to combine, what you need to skip, and everything. So say you, from a bad guy standpoint, you want Grendel to be a major antagonist at the end. Well, you can combine her with Semrhej or combine her with Moghedian or something along
Mhm.
the way to end up at that point, but you have a vision of what that point is.
Combining with Monkhidian would actually work really well.
Yeah, it would, because they were both deceptive. Grendel was a little bit more flamboyant and
Mhm.
Moghedian was a little bit more in the shadows, but they kind of had a similar personality. So it's you can do that, combining Tom with Jylan Sandar or something. You can do that along the way as long as you know where Tom's going to end up.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Well, I'm quite confident it's going to happen. So I hope when it happens, whoever is in charge is thinking along these lines. And so that because I did, again, to anyone who actually liked the show, Lance, if you're still there, which you probably aren't, but I didn't want the show to suck.
No, no,
If you
we
go
wanted
back to
that's
the,
that's why everybody tuned into that first episode. We didn't want it to suck.
yes, the first episode we did that broke 100 views was our preview, our um uh expectations of episode 1 season 1 before it came out, and we just said based on the trailer, I'm concerned this is what it's going to be, but I hope it's not. I hope I'm
Mhm.
wrong because I want this to be good. I want this to be Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, but in a long form TV show format. I want it to be that. I want it, you know, I keep going back to it because it was so seminal and because it was, you know, financially and creatively successful. Of that's not exactly what I saw in my head when I read that, but it's perfect. It fits. The music, the set, the actors, everything about Jackson's Lord of the Rings, even if it wasn't the way I saw it in my head when I read the books, it fit.
Mhm.
And that's what we wanted.
Yeah, and from my closing, you hit on with Jackson's Lord of the Rings. You hit on several points that I had. They had a vision in mind for how it was going to be all the way through, but also they used star power.
Hmm.
Elijah Wood was very well established.
Ian
Ian
McKellen,
Ian McKellen was well established.
Christopher Lee.
Christopher Lee was well established, and they brought up Sean Astin was well established. Uh,
Ironically, the King is the kind of the one that most people didn't know. Viggo Mortensen wasn't really well known at the time.
uh, Viggo Mortensen was well established.
No, he wasn't that well established at the time.
He had been in some westerns.
That came later.
That came after. Okay, so that actually helps my point because you had all these other established actors and actresses, and you brought somebody up who was fantastic in what he
Mhm.
did. So yeah, the star power was there, the vision was there, the cinematography and directing and acting and all of the what you call the pieces of the parts, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, all of that was there, and that's why it was successful. Here, all we had was somebody with an idea that got rights to something that was already famous and tried to press their idea through this famous thing. And we need to go back to the other thing where it's
Mhm.
about the art.
Mhm.
It's not about the idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, fingers crossed that actually happens. I'm mildly optimistic
What's
because
one of the
Hollywood actually
what's
looks like it's shifting.
if
So,
I was to say what's one of the most famous pieces of art in history, what would be the first thing to come to mind?
well, since we're talking,
I'm
since we're
in history, period.
well, but because we're talking TV/movie, the first thing to pop into my head was Godfather, because it is one of the most iconic and celebrated
I'm going way
movies
back.
ever. But you're obviously going back farther than that because of art. So the next thing to pop into my head is theater, Romeo and Juliet.
I was going to say the Mona Lisa.
Mm.
And the reason why that one's important for this conversation is it's just a picture of a girl, right?
That's true.
But it's pure
That's
art.
true.
It's
Yeah.
just a picture of a girl. And to me, she's not even that good looking, but it is pure art because he put everything he could into establishing that versus anything else around it. He just wanted to draw the best picture of a girl that anybody has ever done. Paint, I guess, paint the best picture of a woman that anybody has ever done. And you can go to the Louvre to see it, and you have to wait for tens of hours to get to it, and it's
There's a
about this
huge
big.
line. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a huge line. There's a big rope around it. It's behind glass. It's well protected. And there's all this other stuff you can just like put your nose practically up against to look at it. But it's not as big a deal because the Mona Lisa is the freaking Mona Lisa. Yeah, that's a good point. It's a
Yeah,
good
I
analogy.
think one of the biggest shames of the entire world right now is we've lost sight of art.
Mm,
We've become about messaging and missions and all of these things. We've lost sight of art, and that's
yeah.
where I'm going to end.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to refine it. But first, I think we have to remind ourselves why it's important in the first place, which
Yep.
is kind of what our other episodes are all about. All right. Well, speaking of which, we'll see y'all next time about that. Whenever we have time for it, though we may have some time off here because I'm going to do some traveling. But we'll be back with the philosophical musings later.
All right. Later, guys.